I'm gonna start over, get all that intro stuff out of the way. That's perfect time to get your intro done, Brian. So give us the intro, and then everyone, we've got a little bit of a presentation. Then we're gonna spitball back and forth some strategy stuff, and then we're gonna leave you with actionable, how to qualify yourself, litmus test for what you've got going. Go here, do this. Next steps to getting community done. So Brian, introduction, please.
Yeah, good to see everybody. So I'm Brian. I've been building communities my whole career, which is like 20 years now. So I sort of fell into it really early on and never stopped, and was kind of fortunate to turn that, passion I had into a career. So I've worked at tech, like community platform vendors. I've worked at companies building communities. Now I'm back on the consulting side. So I've kind of seen it, from every different angle possible. And also, like, as we just mentioned, like every type of community, right? So consumer, B2B, partner, like mixtures of all of those things. So I just have this sort of library rattling around in my head, right? Of all these different things. So when people ask, hey, what should we do, or what's next, or how do we go about it? I just have that, kind of experience to draw on. So yeah, that's kind of the nutshell of me.
Yeah, buddy, I'm really excited. I saw the post. So Brian is new to Comsor's advisory board, and I saw a post about it. And we just had Luke from key.org in. That session was really insightful, but I felt like we needed something a little more actionable. That was pretty high level stuff with Luke and Key. Saw Brian's resume, saw what he's got going. He's really close with Comsor, which is the analytics platform for all of your community involvement. That's something, like Jeff, you should definitely check out. Orbit.love and Comsor.com, I think it is. We'll talk about those in a minute. But one of the things that I posted there, if anyone has any specific types of communities that we can use to draw examples from, or you're trying to build on, Jeff, I think you're focused on web development as a persona. So a community of developers posted there, pasted there, chatted there, and then we'll draw on those examples to make it really actionable for those that come to these things. That's why you show up, so we can make it about you. So we'll try to do that. But Brian, why don't you go ahead and share your screen? I can get off a spotlight. And then while we're going through this, as always, chat questions that come up as they come up in your head, and we'll make sure to either answer them right now or get them done at the end of his presentation.
Yeah, very cool. And I just got the chat window here, so I can see if anybody has any questions. So we already did the intro to me, so I'll kind of skip ahead here a little bit. I think one of the things when Alex and I were kind of talking about setting this up and what we were going to talk about, one of the things he was sort of mentioning, which is true, that a lot of people these days are thinking of starting communities in Slack or Discord or newsletters and those kinds of things. Nothing wrong with it, right? I think what we typically see is, sort of the disparity between what can be done, in a platform like that versus elsewhere. Now, I will say, and I'll just go to this one. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? Like, they're low barrier to entry. You can get in there, you can, get your audience in pretty quick. A lot of people already have these apps. So it's becoming like a really popular way, right, to think about community from a platform perspective. I sort of kind of, to go back to the beginning here, I come from the school of more of like owned communities, brand communities on your domain, right? So that's what a lot of my experience is in. And so I've gotten to see kind of both of these play out over the years, right? And I'll kind of tell you why we're talking about technology up front before we get to the other stuff, is to just sort of set some context, right? Of like, where do people start versus where are they trying to go, right? And for me, a lot of it comes down to, frankly, like control, right? Like what can I do from my perspective to create the experience that I want, right? And this is one of the big things that I'm going to talk about a lot as we go through here today is, this is sort of the microcosm technology version of this, but on the broader level, I always want to think about, if I'm going to build a community, any type of community for any type of business, what I want to know is, what do people need to succeed and how can I create that experience, right? And obviously technology is a part of that, but there's a whole bunch of other things, which we'll kind of segue to here as we talk about this, right? So just to give you a sense to kind of back up, right, a little bit here, like why communities, right? Like what's this whole thing about? And the way that I usually show some version of this slide, depending on who I'm talking to, because I think it drives home this idea that a lot of people think of communities in sort of a single use case, right? Oh, we're going to launch it to do support is like a really common one, right? That you'll probably see. The way I think of community is, how can we use it across our entire business, right? Or what kind of value propositions can we get? And so when I start talking to companies about this, it's like, well, what are your goals, right? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish here? And often they'll have some, and then I kind of come in with the, hey, that's great, we'll do that. But there's also all of these other things that we could be doing, right? Like what is the total amount of value that we can deliver? Now, is it always linear like this? Absolutely not, right? Do we do all of these things all at once? Absolutely not, right? But this is the type of thing that we want to be able to come back to a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, whatever it is, and say, yeah, we're tackling a lot of these different use cases. We're delivering value in a bunch of different ways. And hopefully we can measure that, right? So how do we measure awareness? How do we measure decreased costs? How do we measure that our partners understand better our product and are able to sell it or integrate it or, work with it or whatever your particular use case might be. So I talk about this a lot, right? Is like, what is the kind of higher level vision for a community? Why are we doing it? What's the value that it can provide? And ultimately, if you add all that up, what it really means is, here's how I can use this to leverage across my business, right? And be a core part of my business, as opposed to, oh, that's just a thing that we do on the side, right? It's just kind of there. Like, we don't really pay attention to it. When you see companies that really do this well, they're the ones that have really made this, kind of back to that community-led, type of mentality of like, how do we actually make this a core pillar of our business? And so those are the companies I think that succeed well. And that's a message I like to get out pretty often, right? So let me know if you have any questions as we go along in the chat, right? So one of the things we promised you was sort of this idea of, well, what are the 5 key decisions? And rather than like PowerPoint you to death here, what I'm going to do is just go one by one through each of these and just kind of expound on it a little bit. And Alex, or anybody else, feel free to jump in here if you have questions or things we want to hone in on. But the number one thing for me, and this is, if you take nothing else from what I'm going to say, this is the one thing I want you to take away, is, what is the value of this to your audience, your partners, whoever's going to be in this community? One of the mistakes that people often make is they think of community first in terms of, what's the value I'm going to get? What kind of business value can we get? What kind of things are we doing? That makes sense. And you see that's number 2. So we're going to get to that. But the really successful communities have thought through number 1 really, really well, and really crafted their strategy around this idea of how do we serve them first? What kind of value are we bringing? Why are they going to come here? What's the value to them, right? And if we figure that out and we deliver that in a community in some compelling way, then a lot of other things kind of end up taking care of themselves and or are much easier to deal with down the line. And so I like to kind of set everybody's expectations early on with that of, we want to start with kind of the customer, or in this case, the partner experience, right? Before we go do anything else. And so that might be things like learning. That's probably, hey, we need a bunch of content. We need to help them understand, what our products and services are so they can be better partners. We want to connect them together, right? All of those things that kind of help them be a better partner, and also help them in their careers, right? We want to kind of make them the heroes of this deal. And to do that, we need to enable them. And so a lot of communities end up being not just about support, but also learning, enablement, those kinds of things, right? So I'm just taking a look, Alex. I see some of your comments rolling in here.
Yeah, I'll explain that, because I think it's good time to talk about like a litmus test for communities. And I'd like your opinion on this, Brian, of course. I mean, this is big, because community, there is some costs associated. There's resources. You got to shop for stuff. You may want to hire a consultant. You may want to do stuff. It's costly. So litmus test, does your team train partners in an LMS? New communities, like Brian and I were talking about before we recorded, is all of our teams that are in our program typically have training resources materials and video content, stuff that partners need to absorb early in the program or on an ongoing basis. Great. If yours does, I strongly suggest using a community that has an LMS instead of just using an LMS, like Thinkific, Teachable, just LMSs. Circle, Mighty Networks, a few others are LMSs plus community. Job done, right? Do you have an active Slack or social group with partners existing? Yes, we have 200 people in Slack, or maybe you have a Facebook group or something else. Are your partners power users of the technology versus just referral partners? If you only have referral affiliate partnerships, they aren't close enough with your product. It's not something they use weekly, daily. It wouldn't be a very, very good use of or very, very good time to start a community until you have that power use, in my opinion. But Brian, I want your opinion on all these afterwards. And does your solution solve a pain point that has existing communities, right? Development, of course, plenty of communities out there. CRO, social good for you, Ben, stuff like that. These are all community-driven keywords. But go ahead, Brian, on any feedback on that.
Yeah, I mean, the number one point there is pretty interesting to me around LMS. I'm fond of saying, people tend to think of community and learning as two separate kind of siloed things. And you see that a lot when you go to websites, kind of corporate sites and things, and they're kind of off in different areas and different logins and all of this. And I've been kind of beating this drum for like the last 5 or 6 years of like, to me, learning and community are the same thing. When you figure out how to put them together in a compelling way, right? And ultimately, we go back to number one here, right? What's the value proposition for people showing up to this thing? For me, when I go to communities, I'm looking for one-stop shop as much as possible, right? I want to see, oh, okay, cool. Like they got discussions, they got resources, they got knowledge, they have learning, they have ideation, whatever those different things might be. I don't want to have to go around, and hunt and peck and try to find stuff, especially if I'm a partner, right? And I'm super busy and I have a ton of stuff going on. I just need to get to what I need to get to, access it, learn something, and then like get out of there, right? So definitely a really important one there. So kind of transitioning here, and I'll come back to some of the other ones along the way here. Once you've sort of figured out, okay, what do people need to succeed and, what do we need to build to deliver that for them? Then we can move on to number two, which is like, okay, great, we're doing that. What are the outcomes for us as a business, right? What kind of behaviors are we trying to drive? How do we design the community to help us drive those behaviors? And ultimately, how do we measure what we're doing? Right? How do we tie back to, if I go back to the previous bit here, if you look at the value piece, how do I measure some of these things and what metrics do I create around it? Everybody's story on that's going to be a little bit different, but my whole point here is to say, what you really want to be able to do is draw a straight line from the things that you're doing in your community to the business, right? Because ultimately, that's how you're going to know that it's succeeding. And that's how you're going to know that what you're doing is valuable and you're not wasting your time, is if you can say, hey, we did A, B, and C, and that led to, an uptick in this or a decrease in that, which is good. Have that like contextual story, right, around what we're trying to do here, which is really, kind of brings us to number 4 on Alex's list there a little bit, which is, what are we doing that's different? What's compelling? Which brings me to kind of the third point here on mine, which is like, okay, once you've kind of thought about what's our strategy for, the experience and then for ourselves on the outcome side, now you have to like go build a community, right? It's the actual hard work of doing this. And you have to figure out a few key things, usually content, programs, and engagement. So in my world, content is, well, is this a blog program? Is this knowledge articles? Are these, discussion, like all the different forms that content could take, video, all kinds of different things. And what's the cadence of those, right? So having an actual strategy for content and how you're going to bring that forward to people on a regular and ongoing basis, right? Like the number one indicator of a lot of successful communities is they have a strong content program, which makes a lot of sense because like, why are people coming back? Well, because they know that every Monday you post something, right? And every Tuesday there's another thing. And you have sort of this ritual that you create with people where they get accustomed to coming back and, oh, I need to go see what I missed, kind of a thing. Programs for me are, kind of blending into engagement a little bit, but it's around, how are we incentivizing people? How are we rewarding them, right? What are the different things that we do? This right here, what we're doing right now, this is a program, right? Alex has put this together. We're going to do these regularly. We're going to invite a bunch of people. We're going to have experts show up. That's great, right? That's a program that you can do and host in your community. And then, once the event is over, you can put the content there or the recording or whatever the case is, right? Resources and whatnot. And then last but not least is engagement. Now, engagement is a very loaded word, right? It means a lot of different things to a lot of people. So I'll tell you what it means to me. Engagement to me in successful communities simply means that people are engaged, right? They come regularly, they consume content, they contribute with each other, they participate in different ways. But in order for us to get that, engagement is means to the end, right? So it's like, what content and programs are we putting in to get the engagement? But then once we have the engagement, that's not the end of the story, right? It's not, oh, we have 100 posts and we got this many likes and whatever. If you go to any company in the world and you happen to walk into the CEO's office and you start talking about, the success of the community and we have all these posts and whatever, who cares, right? I don't know what that means. And so again, back to the contextualization of, the reason this is important that people are engaged and contributing regularly and these kinds of things is because, again, back to number 2, right? That helps us get to our business outcomes, right? So they're means to an end in that regard. And that's what's really, kind of really important there. And then on Alex's list, he was talking about, super users and those kinds of things. That's also like a program in my world, right? To think about, okay, what does a formalized super user program look like? How do we reward people that are statistically, contributing at a much higher level than others? And how do we make sure that they continue to do that, right? Because they're adding a ton of value for the community and for us on the outcome side. So I'll pause there for a minute and just sort of get some reaction.
Yeah, and I've got my own reactions, but this is the thing. So like you mentioned measure success, I'd tie one more sort of sub point there, which is you can get analytics from your community that nothing else can provide you. Literally nothing else. You're on the board of Comsor, which goes much deeper into this, but just these community apps like Mighty Networks, Circle is one I hear a lot. You can throw out your own that you guys are vetting. You probably know better than I do. I've been in Mighty Networks for 2 years, so I haven't looked out there in a while. But these platforms will have obviously your top members, most active member data. It will have retention rate data. It will have the times of the year where retention was higher. It will have the top topics, the most engaged posts. You can onboard people into your community that may just be exploring your partnership. They may really like your community more than your application, more than your tool. And then they'll engage with stuff and you'll get data from that. You also have a communication device with this community. And if you use a community solution, you can have multiple ways of communicating. So you can tag someone in a comment. You can directly message them. I can do a bulk message that is just a push notification to all of my members, or I can do a bulk email to all of my members, and I can export all of my members with the answers to questions they asked in the onboarding of the community. I have 3 questions that they answer. I can export with all of that with LinkedIn profiles, as well as what courses they're in, what they've done, the top posts that they've been involved in, as well as have they referred and what level of referral, bronze, silver, gold, are they for the community? Do they refer their teammates, their friends, etc.? That's data that is just super valuable for us. And you can't get that from Slack.
Yeah. You're probably going to learn more in like 6 weeks than you learned in like the previous 6 years about your audience, right? Whoever they are. And the other thing I always say is like, companies spend so much time and money like guessing what their customers, partners, employees want. Community is a great way to just ask them, right? And they're going to vote with their clicks, as I would say, right? So as you're thinking through what is our content, what are our programs, how are we engaging people, they're going to tell you pretty quickly, right? Like what they like, what they don't like, what resonates with them, what they need more of, what they need less of. So it becomes a great way to really connect with them on a much deeper and closer level than you really can in any other form. You mentioned platforms, which I'll get to in a minute, and then we've talked already a little bit about measure success, right? So before you go build a community, these are the 5 things I would like everybody to kind of ask themselves and answer to a degree. You're not going to know all the answers to all these things, right? Totally fine. But you want to have a good sense of each of these 5 things before you kind of move forward, so that you start to form the basis of like what your strategy might be, right? Once you've sort of decided, okay, great, this is something we want to do, we kind of know what we're doing, here's some kind of areas of investment, right? So people often ask me like, what do I need to do to make this thing work? Personally on the people side, I believe that go hire a community professional, right? You can probably do this yourself and start something decent, but depending on the size of your program and your audience and those kinds of things, investing in someone that does this for a living is always a good idea, right? Especially if community is truly going to be one of the core parts of your business, right? We talked a little bit about content, getting things that are locked in people's heads out of their heads and onto a screen is going to be one of the most important things you can do. And so you're going to want to invest in, content, whatever that means to you and your business, to make sure that there's a drip campaign essentially of here's this great stuff and like keep coming back and we want to keep making you better. We talked about programs, so I don't need to hit that one too much. And then that brings us to kind of technology, right? There is a vast landscape of platforms that look a little bit like this, right? So this is Mac's thing that he updates every month, I think, with new platforms. Now, I show you this not to make this scary and for you to go, oh my God, like there's just so much stuff on here. How am I ever going to figure this out? I show you this actually in a positive way to say, whatever strategy you come up with and whatever core pillars of it, maybe it's events is something that you really want to go into, or maybe it's something else. There's enough platforms out there for all of us. And the question is, which one or ones do you get and how do you integrate them together and stitch them together in some, reasonable way to deliver that experience, right? Now, again, you may start with just like one of these things and go, great, that's all we need. Other people might look at this and go, well, we want to have, we want to get Discourse, and then we want to plug that into, Comsor, and then we want to plug that into, whatever it is, right? There's all these different things, and this chessboard is constantly moving. The technology is not ultimately what's important, right? The important part is like, how do you make your strategy come alive? Technology is a part of that, but I always kind of warn people against going down this road of thinking that platforms are going to solve all their problems and they're means to an end, right? And stay focused on your strategy, stay focused on the experience you're trying to create. And I think if you do that well, you pick a few platforms that kind of plug into that, and your life will be, all good, right? So I was just checking the chat here. That's kind of, what I had as a primer here. And I know we just have a few minutes, but happy to continue the conversation or ask, answer any questions you may have.
Yeah. Heather, can you do me a favor and elaborate? Because I don't fully understand the second part, the actual question in that post. If you want to either chat or voice elaborate on that.
I can just chime in. Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay,
cool. Yeah. So this is not my area of expertise, and maybe I'm thinking about it wrong and kind of thinking more of like a partner-centric versus a customer-centric community. But I think some of the needs and functions that they might play in a community might be a bit unique from one another. Yep. So when I was looking at kind of the questions of things to consider, this initiative, we're in the early, just context of, if you didn't see my comment, we're in the early stages of building out a community at Heap, but the person who's kind of owning the project lives more on the customer success side of things. So I definitely know that they're looking from that customer angle. And I think that partners will be kind of siloed out, at least in the early iteration. So my question was just at this stage, are there any kind of key ways to influence, the folks who are going to be really owning that community to be inclusive of partners? Maybe I'm thinking about it off, but I mean, I can elaborate further than that, but does that question make sense? I'm not going to be the owner of it, but I want partners to be kind of in these early stages as we're creating and building it. I want my team to at least be thinking of how partners will be involved down the road. And I don't have necessarily the prior experience to be prescriptive about how we should do that. So I was curious if you've seen this play out, or can partners kind of be added on after the fact or something like that?
Yeah, they can be brought into the flow whenever it makes sense. What I would say is, and this is true of kind of like all business, I think, is like, in that scenario, if I was in your shoes, right, what I would do is I would go to the team who owns the community and say, I would have a story ready to go around, hey, here's what partners are to us at this company. Here's what they could be in relation to this community. And ultimately, like, here's the value of having them there, right? It could be that they're answering customers' questions, right? And things like that. Like, what's the value proposition for the community team to spend cycles to say, okay, like, yeah, we do want partners in here. We want to come up, like, we want to co-create a program together that, helps us get to some of those goals and objectives. So I would kind of come loaded with that story and that value proposition, and then figure out how you work together kind of collaboratively to figure out, okay, like, how do we get them in there? What are the guidelines? What does that look like? And then how do we make sure that it's successful along the way? So that's my take on it.
Cool, thank you.
I was just going to mention one thing to get your feedback on it too, Brian. Obviously you can have Slack and you can have a community. We didn't deprecate Slack when we launched our community. We keep our Slack group the customer sort of group, the communities for anyone that wants to join. So we do direct messaging more in Slack. We keep our service update stuff in Slack. We create small groups between our partners that are collaborating on something in Slack. So that could be something that you talk to the team about, where maybe you do have Slack and you open that Slack channel up or that station up for customers, but then you do still launch a community, but the community brings everyone, customers, partners, advocates, just whoever wants to be in the community.
And a lot of the community platforms that you'll experience have pretty granular permissioning too, right? And so one of the things you can say is, we have this big community under this big umbrella, but we can also permission it off and create private groups and other private areas and things like that. And I've seen, that's what I like to do. I've seen a lot of success with communities to say, here's where customers are at, here's where our partners are, here's where our employees are. They have kind of their own separate parts of the community, and then there's sort of the part that they can all access, obviously, like the public piece of it. And what I find is the cross-pollination of them kind of being in there. It's like, well, ostensibly I came here originally to, get a piece of documentation or do something from a partner perspective. But while I'm here, maybe I'll pop over, into the public thing and answer someone's question or engage in some way. And I think kind of having them on one platform, where they can all kind of cross-pollinate together, ends up getting you a little bit further down the road on some of those engagement goals and those kinds of things.
Yeah, agreed. I think you have to understand what types of communication your customers want. How do they want to interact with your support or success or just whoever? Have them have that option. Don't force them outside to some third-party tool that they have to install another mobile app. I have Mighty Networks. I love it, but I do have to get people to go to it. I do have to get people out of their order of operations. So that's the hard part there. But to your point, Brian, one of the cool features of a lot of these communities, Circle and Mighty Networks are the only ones I really know well. Outside from the LMS, outside from typical community features, they have the ability to create groups and make those groups locked, meaning invite only, or they can be open. So you can have a customer group, and then you can make sure to feed only updates that are relevant to the customers just to that group. And then they have their own little separate area with chat, with the ability for you to turn on and off chat, that kind of stuff too. And they can follow topics, which is good too. So to your point, it is in your best interest overall to have everybody in one place where everything happens. That's great, but sometimes you do have to cater a little bit to communication.
Yeah, and the one point you touched on a little bit that I think is worth me just spending one moment on here is, a lot of people often ask, hey, before the community, we had these other channels, or maybe we still have those channels, to your point, right? We still have a Slack or a Discord or like other things going on. How do we sort of bring everybody into this new centralized, community environment that we're trying to create? How do we wean them off, right, of those other channels, what they were used to? And this is going to sound cheesy and whatever, but it's true. Value is the answer. Right. So if the new community environment where you're trying to move everybody, is full of great content and useful resources, and you've, consolidated other platforms and moved that stuff into the community, then, that's where they're going to go. Right. And so it's kind of in your hands actually to think about, how do we take all this good stuff we have and put it in one place and really make that the center of things? And if you do that and you do it well and it's delivering on the value, then that's where they're going to go. Right. But it takes a lot of work on our end. And that's why a lot of people don't do it, is because it takes a lot of work to kind of think through that and consolidate those things. But ultimately, you kind of have to, your North Star has to be like, would I want to visit this community? Does this feel like a place I would go and enjoy? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you're probably on to something here, and it becomes a lot easier to make those transitions.
Yeah. And that is a very, very good point, because this is the other thing that partnerships kind of have a unique situation around, is because you guys have to have a couple of things. You have to have a place where you train your partners. You have to have a place where you communicate with your partners, and you also have to have sort of that content engine and that resource center and that event center, workshops, etc. These communities are a great answer to all of that. You can make this your partner hub. Essentially, it can be where they get everything done from you, and they're one-stop shop. Keep Slack for maybe top tier, your top 20 partners that you're doing a lot with, but then open up that community and make it super valuable for them to come back. So bring in experts to talk to them about sales, about operations, about CRO, stuff that your tool is good for, and make sure that there's value that is just in the community, inherent value. So instead of taking blog posts off the blog and putting them in the community, create unique content that's just for the community, and have that be a really awesome resource for them to get everything they need done. So let's do this, Brian. We're out of time, but we still have, I think you and I have blocked off. So I'd like to get a couple, at least this done. What should we do if we are in the stage that I think most of the people on this call, most of the people that are going to listen to this, they're in the stage of, we know we need a community, or we know we want one. Everybody wants a great community. That's not the question. I have Slack. Maybe I have a little bit of a budget for a potential tool. It's $99 a month for Mighty Networks. We're not going to have trouble signing off on that. I've got content. It's all kind of scattered, and I want to do this. What should I do? First, second, third, what should my steps be? The team needs to get aligned on it. I need buy-in. What do you recommend people do to kind of just almost like marketing plan, but community plan, and get that started?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, answer those 5 questions, right, for yourself, and like deeply consider what those are. Number 2, back to Heather's point, engage people around your organization, right, to say, hey, how can we all work on this together? Like, community should never be one person's job or, one department's thing. When it really succeeds at most companies, it's because there's a bunch of different stakeholders and they're all bringing different things to the table and participating. And that kind of takes some of the pressure off of like you to have to deliver the whole thing, right? So it's sort of like, strategy, collaboration, and then to your point, making those investments of, okay, now we know what we're trying to do. How do we actually deliver on that? Well, we need to go get a platform. We need to think about what our content program is. We need to, think about our engagement programs. Then you need to build it, right? So the actual work of building a thing and launching it. And then, from there, obviously, well, not obviously, actually, one of the things that happens is people launch a community and everybody goes, we did it, we're done. And it could not be further from the truth. Actually, it's the opposite, right? Like the day you launch your community is when the real work starts. And now you have to give it constant care and feeding and keep the flywheels moving on all the things we've talked about. And then, and only then, if you do that for some sustained period of time consistently, then you'll go, oh, great. Like we've actually built something that's worthwhile here. People seem to like it. We're evolving it along the way. So that's a really there's a million things packed into every one of those things I just said, but that's, I would say, the high level flow here that I would, prescribe people to follow.
Awesome. Yeah. And obviously Brian's a resource for you guys. So definitely reach out to him and try to get some time and figure out if you guys can work with Brian, if he has the time. But I'll give you these couple of takeaways from my experience that are along those lines. One of the great things I've been involved with from a support side of things, from the tools that we worked with, is a company called MemberStack. They are just our payments gateway, nothing special. You wouldn't think they'd have a robust, thriving community, but they do. It is in Slack, so that's the one thing that's different from what I'd advise. But what's great about it is I can't really get a lot of support from memberstack.com, from chat even. If I go to the community and I post in general, I post in the right channel, I get a ton of support from the community members, yes, but also their customer support, and this is for you, Heather, they are active in that community, replying to questions, because what they want, and your CX should have, or CS should have this as a priority as well, is crowdsourced help. You know, it's better for them, and it's less of a obligation for them if the community members are supplying those answers. So kind of like a forum, yes, you want to create that sort of system where new customers and new partners, when they have questions, instead of thinking I'm going to email Heather, or I'm going to send a chat request or a support ticket, get them into the mentality of, I'm going to post it to the community. I'm going to get feedback there. Heather's going to be in there. My CS person is going to be in there. They're going to reply quickly. And that can be where CS and this community initiative overlap, is around, let's create the support engine and sort of get them in that realm of, I'm going to go to the community first. And we do things like create polls as well. You can create chat around the top 5 questions that customers or partners had last week. You can create polls and group answers and different post types as well to kind of answer some of those customer success questions. Anything on customer success and communities and best practices there, Brian?
I mean, overall, I think what we're driving home here is that, you know, there's effort required, right? Like, build it and they will come doesn't exist with communities, right? It's like, what's the draw? Why are people coming? Ultimately, you know, you're battling for people's time, right? With everything else. And so it better be good, right? If they're going to come and spend their time. You know, there's a bunch of things on the success side, you know, for sure, around, hey, we're engaging these people. Honestly, the biggest thing you can do is think about, you know, how do we get them to be more knowledgeable about our products and services and those kinds of things. If we do that, then a lot of other things from the success standpoint are going to kind of stem from there. So when I start thinking about communities that are built specifically around success, or it's a major component of it, I'm thinking through the support use case, the learning use case, you know, all these things we've already talked about, right? To really drive home, like, what does it mean for someone to be successful, and how do we kind of curate that environment so that that can be the case?
Yep. And the technological lift of your platform, that is another litmus test, I'd say, to say, yeah, community is going to be really good for you guys. If you guys have a lot of activity in your help dot, in your help center, another signal to say, yeah, you could probably support a community. The MemberStack option that I mentioned, MemberStack is not a heavy lift to implement, but when you start integrating it with your payment systems, when you start creating workflows from the website through MemberStack, then it becomes a heavier lift. And the community that I mentioned has solutions partners in the community. They have customers like myself in the community, and they have their CS in the community as well. Everybody's helping everybody, and it's a win-win-win all around. I've even hired a couple contractors from within that Slack community to help me with my build. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. I think alignment needs to happen. I think get that done first. I'm sure, Brian, you have resources. We're going to create an article with this video with some resources that Brian is going to provide us, and some links. The recommendations, Brian, what's your recommended stack for communities if you were to say training, LMS, plus anything at all that I don't know about? Any recommendations for tools? Obviously, Comsor.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one that's not so sexy that people often forget is like the authentication piece of this whole thing, right? So if you're going to go out and buy a community platform and an LMS and, you know, all these things and try to stitch them together, the key component that puts all those things together is some sort of identity provider or SSO, right? So I think that's a key part of the kind of technology stack that a lot of people often forget, that, you know, if we're trying to create this experience, we want it to be stitched together well. That's a super important one. Other than that, the answer, unsurprisingly, coming from a consultant, is it really depends, right? As you saw that big map, there's a green field out there of, a million different permutations of all that stuff you could do. The question is, which ones. So, in your case, right, it could be like, well, we have Mighty Networks for kind of the core piece of it. Maybe we wanted a little bit of help on the event side. So we're going to go do like an Eventbrite or a Splash or, something like that. It's kind of these decisions you make in the strategic phase that inform, like I need an events platform. I need a community platform. Maybe I want something for surveys or, and you just kind of figure out how you stitch all that stuff together in a compelling way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we should, I don't know, make some sort of a playbook for new partner teams that need to launch a community, and maybe we can collaborate on when we have time, Brian. But I think the couple of steps there, I think you do the litmus test. I think you answer the questions. I definitely say book some time with your head of CS, head of marketing, find out what they've planned, what they've already got going, maybe include your CEO if you're a smaller organization, figure out what each department needs to gain from this community, what each department's role in the community is going to be, who's going to be active in there, who's going to be posting what. I'd even put together a list of types of content that are going to be community exclusive, what's going to be in the community versus the blog, what it will only be in the community. Then make sure when you launch the community, I think an important thing is to say, all right, when these types of issues arise, they show up in email, they show up in chat, they show up somewhere. Those types of issues we are going to post about in the community. We are going to answer them in the community, and we are going to link to that answer in the reply to that person. This isn't for all customer issues or partner issues, but the ones that a lot of people are going to have issues with. What you do is you post about it, you create a little bit of video content, post it in the community, link to it, create a discussion under it. And platforms like Mighty Networks are great because I have former discussions buried deep. But if I just go down and scroll down and comment in that discussion or that post or whatever it is in my newsfeed, it immediately puts it at the very top. That's not something that all platforms do. I don't think Slack does that. I love that feature because I can just quickly go back and surface old answers, old content, old stuff. So I tell all my partner managers, if you guys may have heard this, if you have a question about our program or something specific, like where to get contracts or SOPs or something, post it in the community. I will answer it there. I don't answer it in Slack. So that's the way I kind of make sure that flywheel, if you will, of community engagement happens. Last thing I'll say about that, don't think about it as I've got to post every day. I've got to have a lot of content flowing. Think about it as what's going to be community specific. What's the inherent value day one, as soon as they land in the community? Why are they going to stay there for half an hour and come back the next day? What is going to be exclusive to the community and nowhere else? Plan a couple of events that are hosted in the community, put a couple videos, a couple courses in there before you launch. That'll be enough. Don't think about it like a blog or a LinkedIn situation where I have to post 3 times a day. Just think about it like inherent value, and you have a flywheel effect to it. Content gets sourced and you put it in there. Cool.
Yeah, sounds good.
That's a lot. Thank you, Brian. You've been huge, man. That presentation was awesome. Super actionable stuff. If anyone has any other questions, post it to the community. I will try my best to answer. Go to Brian's website, go to his LinkedIn, follow him, and come back to Brian with any specific questions, consulting stuff, all that. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Brian. Anything else before I let you go?
Nope, I think that's it. Good to see everybody.
Yeah, and I'll put Brian's information stuff. This will be an article. It'll be a post in our community. Thanks again, guys. Thanks again, Brian. You've been awesome.
Yep. See ya.